Rumors had a strange way of moving faster than ships in the void, carried not by engines but by fear and imagination. In the alien ranks, whispers began to grow about a human warrior unlike any they had faced before. They called this figure the Crocodile in human form, a name chosen because of the way this human fought, with patience so steady it felt like still waters, yet with sudden strikes so devastating that enemies barely had time to understand what had happened before they were gone. Around campfires and in the dim glow of ship corridors, soldiers told one another half-true stories, each more dramatic than the last. Some swore the human could wait in silence for hours, unseen, and then strike with claws invisible to the eye. Others claimed that the warrior moved like a shadow in water, calm and slow until the moment came when all that calmness exploded into unstoppable power. None of them knew the truth, but the uncertainty was enough to spread unease. What made the rumor even more powerful was its mystery. No alien could say where this human came from, nor what battles they had fought before. The stories were built out of fragments, whispers of destroyed squads, vanished patrols, and sudden defeats where a human presence had been spotted at the edges. The soldiers who had survived spoke with shaky voices, describing movements too quick, strikes too precise, and a presence that never rushed but never hesitated either. They said it felt like being hunted by something ancient, something that studied every weakness before it struck. The image of a crocodile waiting beneath the water's surface, calm, still almost harmless until it snapped with lightning speed, fit perfectly with what they felt. Among the alien officers, these tales were dismissed as exaggerations at first. They believed their warriors were stronger, their weapons more advanced, and their numbers far greater than anything humanity could bring. But in private, even commanders found themselves wondering. Why were patrols returning with fewer soldiers? Why did small human squads seem capable of standing against larger alien groups? And why did the survivors always describe the same thing? Silence, patience, and then a sudden storm that left destruction behind. The crocodile in human form became more than a rumor. It became a symbol of human defiance. For the humans, the whispers among the aliens worked in their favor. They knew the value of fear in war. A name carried power, and if their enemy believed in a phantom waiting to strike, then half the battle was already won before the first shot was fired. To the human forces, this warrior was not a legend but a strategy, a way to remind the galaxy that humanity would not kneel, that they would fight with every ounce of cunning and strength. But for the aliens, each retelling of the rumor made it harder to sleep, harder to feel confident, harder to believe their superiority was secure. And so, the shadow of the crocodile in human form stretched far beyond any single battlefield, wrapping itself around the hearts of those who feared they might one day meet it face to face. The first time the aliens saw him with their own eyes, the air itself seemed heavier. It happened during a tense standoff on the edges of a ruined colony, where the remains of broken walls and burned-out buildings gave the place a ghostly silence. A squad of alien soldiers advanced carefully, weapons raised, expecting the usual rush of human resistance or the sound of hidden traps. But instead, they found a lone figure standing in the open, waiting as if the entire battlefield belonged to him. His posture was steady, his breathing calm, and his eyes carried the weight of patience, the kind that made even trained warriors hesitate. He did not shout, did not threaten, did not even lift a weapon. He simply looked at them the way a predator studies prey, quiet and calculating, as though every detail of their movement was already measured and accounted for. The aliens had expected anger or fear, but they saw neither. His stillness was more frightening than any roar. To them, he looked out of place, just a human, small compared to their armored forms, vulnerable in the open. Yet the longer they stared, the more they realized he was not vulnerable at all. He was in control. One of the soldiers shifted nervously, adjusting his weapon, but the man's calm gaze followed the motion so smoothly that it felt like being caught in a trap. Even the sound of wind brushing across the broken colony walls seemed to fade under that heavy silence. Whispers moved through the alien squad. Some muttered that this must be the figure the stories spoke of, the crocodile in human form. Others tried to laugh it off, insisting he was only a man standing still. But none could ignore the tension in their chests, the sense that the standoff was not in their favor. It was not their numbers or their weapons that would decide the moment, but something else, something deeper, like an unseen current pulling them into danger. His calmness told them what they feared most, that he was not worried about survival. He had already seen the outcome, and it would not be theirs. Then came the smallest movement. He tilted his head, not quickly, not aggressively, but in a slow and deliberate way that made it feel like a decision had been made. The aliens' grip on their weapons tightened, yet none of them fired. They could not explain why. Perhaps it was the weight of that gaze, or the knowledge that the first one to act might never live to regret it. It was as if time stretched thin, a moment that felt like hours, where every breath became louder and heavier in their ears. In that standoff, the aliens realized something far more dangerous than human weapons existed, the human spirit that refused to yield. His eyes told them clearly he was not prey. He was the hunter. And though no shot had been fired yet, the battlefield already belonged to him. The silence of the standoff did not last forever. One nervous alien soldier finally fired, a flash of energy cutting through the broken air. That single shot shattered the stillness, and in the same instant, the human warrior moved. His movements were not wild or panicked. They were sharp, deliberate, and powerful, like a crocodile exploding from the water after waiting in silence. He lunged with precision, using the cover of rubble to close the distance before the aliens could adjust. The first alien barely had time to react before being thrown backward. His weapon knocked clean from his grip. The force of the strike shocked the others. They had always thought of humans as weaker, slower, too fragile to face their advanced technology head-on. But what they saw now was nothing like the humans they had fought before. Each move was measured, each strike timed with brutal accuracy, as if he had studied the rhythm of their actions long before the battle began. More fire erupted as the aliens regrouped, but he kept advancing. Shots sizzled past him, some striking stone, others scattering sparks across the deck plates. He never wasted motion. He ducked at the right second, shifted his weight just enough, and when he struck back, it was sudden and devastating. His arms and legs became like the jaws of a crocodile, silent one moment, crushing the next. Every time they thought they had trapped him, he slipped through, appearing where they least wanted him to be. The squad's leader barked commands, trying to steady his warriors, but fear had already begun to spread. They realized that this was not just a human with strength. It was a human who understood patience, who could endure their weapons long enough to find his opening. He did not fight like prey scrambling for survival. He fought like a predator who had chosen this moment and was determined to finish it. One alien, desperate to break his advance, rushed forward with a heavy strike. The man met it head-on, his body twisting with practiced control. He caught the strike, redirected the force, and slammed his opponent to the ground with such finality that the others froze. For them, it was a shocking sight. How could one human face their armor and weapons without fear, and not only survive but dominate? The battle raged in flashes of light and the sound of clashing force. Yet through it all, his expression never changed. Calm eyes, steady breath. He looked less like someone struggling for his life and more like someone delivering a lesson, showing them what patience, timing, and courage could do against raw technology. By the time the dust settled, the aliens realized they had underestimated the one they mocked in whispers. The crocodile in human form was no mere story. He was real, and he had just shown them that humanity's strength was not only in numbers or weapons. It lived in the unshakable will of those who refused to back down, no matter how impossible the fight seemed. The fight shifted from pure strength to something deeper, something the aliens had not expected. They thought they could overwhelm him with numbers and firepower, but the human no longer met them head-on with brute force alone. Instead, he began to shape the battlefield itself, bending it to his advantage. The ground was uneven, scattered with broken metal and shallow pools of water left from earlier rainfall. Where the alien saw obstacles, he saw tools. When energy blasts hit the wet ground, steam rose up in thick clouds, and he slipped through the haze like a shadow. Each time the fog thickened, his figure disappeared, only to reappear behind them or from a direction they least expected. He struck quickly, never staying in one place long enough to become a target. A pile of debris became his shield. A broken support beam became a weapon in his hands. Even the shallow water became part of his plan. He moved through it silently, his steps hidden beneath the rippling surface. While the aliens' heavier armor splashed and gave away their positions, the warriors tried to regroup, but it was like fighting something they couldn't predict. They were trained for open battlefields, not for an enemy who turned every corner and shadow into a weapon. He timed his attacks with patience, waiting until one soldier became separated or stepped too far into the steam before striking with sudden precision. It reminded them of their own stories of predators waiting in rivers, motionless until the perfect second to strike. At one moment, the aliens cornered him near a cracked bulkhead wall. They thought they had him trapped, but instead of retreating, he slammed his foot into the wall, sending loose metal tumbling down. The debris scattered across the floor, tripping two soldiers and cutting off the line of fire from the others. Before they could recover, he had already vanished into another cloud of steam. The lesson became clear. Not everything could be won with raw strength or superior technology. His survival came from a blend of patience, timing, and wisdom. He understood when to strike and when to wait, when to face the enemy directly, and when to use the environment to hide his movements. Every action was purposeful, every step measured. The aliens began to feel the weight of fear pressing against their discipline. Their advanced weapons no longer felt like an advantage. Each blast that missed only seemed to make the human stronger, more confident, as if he was teaching them something through the fight itself. Survival was not about domination. It was about outsmarting danger. By the time the skirmish began to slow, the alien soldiers were no longer thinking of him as just a man. They whispered again about the crocodile, not as a rumor, but as a truth. He was not only strong, he was wise, and wisdom, they realized, was more dangerous than any weapon they carried. Stories of his victories traveled faster than the battles themselves. Among the alien camps, whispers turned into warnings and warnings into dread. They no longer saw him as just a human soldier. They called him a beast wearing human skin, a predator who could not be predicted or defeated. Around their fires and in their barracks, they spoke of how he appeared from the shadows, struck with sudden force, and then disappeared as if swallowed by the earth. The more the stories spread, the more exaggerated they became. Some claimed he could vanish into thin air. Others swore his eyes glowed like an animal watching from the dark. What began as disbelief now grew into genuine fear. For the aliens, fear was dangerous. It made their ranks restless. Soldiers hesitated before stepping onto battlefields where he was rumored to be. Even the most disciplined warriors flinched at sudden noises, imagining him waiting in the fog or behind broken walls. Leaders tried to calm them, insisting he was just a man, but the truth lingered in every mind. He was not like other men. He fought with patience, struck with precision, and never wasted energy. He did not just fight them. He studied them, broke their rhythm, and turned their strength into weakness. While the aliens grew uneasy, the humans felt something else stirring: hope. Until then, many had doubted their chances. The alien armies were larger, stronger, and carried weapons beyond human invention. Yet hearing of the crocodile-like warrior gave them courage. They saw proof that one person's skill and bravery could shake even the most powerful enemy. Around mess halls, in crowded tents, and across radio transmissions, the tale spread. Soldiers leaned closer to hear the details. Civilians whispered prayers of thanks, and leaders quietly smiled, knowing fear could win as many battles as weapons. Among the younger recruits, he became a symbol. They trained harder, pushed through exhaustion, and carried themselves with more pride, telling each other, if he can stand against them, so can we. Even those who had never seen him began to speak of him as if they knew him personally, as if his courage belonged to all of humanity. It was no longer just his fight. It became everyone's fight. The aliens, once so certain of their victory, now carried doubt into every mission. Their commanders noticed it, hesitation in their movements, hesitation in their eyes. Soldiers who once charged without fear now second-guessed every shadow. Some even requested to be transferred away from the front lines where he was said to roam. Fear had spread like a silent fire through their ranks, weakening them before battles even began. In this way, without speaking a word, without boasting or demanding recognition, the human had already begun to change the war. His presence was more than physical. It was psychological. To his enemies, he was the crocodile lurking beneath the surface. To his allies, he was proof that humans were far from broken. His legend was no longer just a story. It was a force reshaping the war itself. The aliens had grown tired of the fear that followed his name. Their soldiers whispered too much, their morale slipped too often, and every rumor of his presence shook their confidence. So in a bold and desperate move, they devised a trap. They lured him into a false battle, drawing him toward an abandoned outpost where they had hidden their best hunters. When the moment came, nets of energy fell, walls of force locked into place, and their weapons aimed at him with merciless precision. For the first time, the warrior known as the Crocodile in human form stood captured, surrounded by his enemies. The aliens expected him to thrash like a beast, to roar in fury, to fight even in hopelessness. But what they saw instead unsettled them even more. He did not bow. He did not cry out. He stood tall in the center of their prison, his face calm, his breathing steady, his eyes unflinching. They had stripped away his weapons and bound his hands, yet it seemed as if he still carried a strength they could not touch. The more they studied him, the more uneasy they became. One alien officer sneered, expecting fear, but the human's silence cut deeper than any scream. When they tried to humiliate him with taunts, he did not respond. When they demanded he kneel, he refused without a word, his dignity speaking louder than any resistance could. Days passed inside the alien stronghold, and still he remained unbroken. They deprived him of comfort, placed him under harsh light, and pressed him with endless questions about human strategies, but he gave them nothing. His restraint was his weapon now. Instead of raging like an animal, he showed patience like a hunter waiting in still waters. His calmness spread through the alien guards, unnerving them. Some avoided his gaze, others whispered that he was more dangerous bound than free. To the aliens, power meant domination, the ability to bend others to their will. Yet here was a man who stood in chains and still carried himself like the master of the room. He did not see himself as defeated, only delayed. This quiet defiance gnawed at their pride. They had captured the crocodile, but they could not crush the spirit within him. It became clear to them that their victory was only on the surface. Deep down, they had failed to conquer the very thing that made him dangerous, his unshakable dignity. Even as they tightened their grip, his presence became a message to his people. News of his capture spread, but so did accounts of his composure. Humans whispered of his courage, telling each other that even in chains, he fought for them by refusing to break. To the aliens, the capture was supposed to end his legend. Instead, it only made it grow stronger. They had caged the crocodile, but they had not tamed him, and in their hearts, they feared the day those calm, steady eyes would be free again. Inside the alien stronghold, tension was thick. The human warrior had been held for days, and though his body showed the weight of captivity, his spirit remained untouched. The guards whispered about him, unsettled by his calm stare and the way he carried himself even in chains. Finally, unable to understand what gave him such unshakable strength, an alien commander entered his cell. This commander was no ordinary officer. He had seen countless battles, crushed enemies without hesitation, and believed humans to be fragile creatures compared to his kind. Yet, as he looked at the man before him, bound but unbroken, he felt something unfamiliar: doubt. The commander's voice was sharp as he demanded, "Why do you fight so fiercely? Why do you risk your life against an enemy far stronger than you? What do you gain?" He expected arrogance, perhaps a defiant boast, or the empty pride of a soldier too stubborn to surrender. But the human's reply came in a steady, quiet tone that cut through the silence of the room like a blade. He did not speak of glory, conquest, or revenge. Instead, he said, "I fight for family. I fight for freedom. I fight for the simple right to live with dignity." The words were simple, yet they carried a weight the commander had not expected. In his world, wars were fought for territory, for resources, for domination. The idea of fighting for something as personal and human as family and dignity was foreign, almost foolish, and yet it struck deep. Around them, the guards who overheard shifted uncomfortably. Some lowered their eyes, shaken by the raw honesty of the answer. They had been taught to see humans as weak, desperate beings clinging to survival, but in this moment, they saw something different. They saw a strength that came not from weapons or numbers, but from the heart. The commander tried to scoff, to dismiss it as weakness, but the human's gaze held firm. "You have power," the human continued, "but you do not understand what it means to fight for something you love. That is why you fear us. Because even if you chain us, even if you outnumber us, you cannot take away what we carry inside. Family, freedom, dignity, these are not things you can steal. These are the reason we will endure." The cell grew quiet. The commander's jaw tightened, but he did not speak. The words had reached even him, piercing through years of hardened belief. For the first time, he felt a small crack in the certainty that his people's strength was unmatched. This human, with no weapon and no army at his side, had planted a seed of doubt in his heart. What unsettled the commander most was not the defiance of the words, but the truth in them. And though he turned to leave, the echo of that answer followed him out, lingering like a shadow in his thoughts. It was then he realized that their greatest enemy was not the human's weapons, but the unyielding spirit that no chain could hold. The prison walls shook as alarms wailed, the sound of chaos echoing through the alien base. A strike had gone wrong. Explosions rattled the halls, fire spread, and the once orderly fortress fell into panic. Guards scrambled to contain the damage, but it was too late. Corridors filled with smoke, ceilings cracked, and both captors and captives were trapped together. In the middle of it all stood the human warrior, still chained, though his eyes remained sharp. For a moment, he could have chosen escape, slipping away in the confusion. Yet instead, he looked around and saw something the aliens themselves were too blind to notice. Their own young soldiers stumbling, gasping for air, their faces twisted with fear. The moment became a test not of his strength, but of his heart. With a roar of effort, he tore at his bindings, using the chaos as cover. Shackles snapped against stone, his wrists bleeding but free. Instead of running toward safety, he ran toward the flames. Alien officers shouted in disbelief as he lifted fallen beams, pulled trapped soldiers from debris, and guided both humans and aliens alike through the smoke-filled corridors. His movements were precise, calm, even in the face of danger. The same patience and sudden bursts of force that earned him the name Crocodile in human form. But now, it wasn't used to kill, it was used to protect. One young alien soldier, barely able to stand, looked up at him in shock. "Why save me?" the soldier whispered, expecting cruelty. The human only answered with the same quiet resolve he had shown in captivity. "Because life matters." Yours, mine, theirs. It all matters. The words carried no hatred, no demand for gratitude, only truth. As explosions grew louder, more aliens began to follow his lead. Guards who once mocked his resilience now found themselves listening to his orders, moving debris together, creating paths where none existed. Even humans still held in cells found freedom as he led them out, not by force of conquest, but by the sheer will to protect anyone near him. His strength, once feared for destruction, now revealed itself in a new light. He was not simply a predator, he was a shield. When the fires finally died down and the survivors stood together under the smoky sky, silence fell. Both humans and aliens stared at him, not as an enemy or a prisoner, but as something greater. A figure who had chosen compassion in the heart of chaos. The alien commander who once questioned him now watched with conflicted eyes, realizing the human's greatest power was not his ability to fight, but his refusal to hate. That night, the story spread beyond the ruined fortress. It was told in hushed voices, carried from camp to camp, the human warrior who saved friend and foe alike, who proved strength was not measured by destruction, but by the lives one chose to protect. It was in that moment more than any battle that his legend truly began. The smoke from the ruined fortress still hung in the air when the survivors gathered outside, shaken and exhausted. For years, the aliens had spoken of humans as reckless creatures, driven only by instinct, dangerous because of their stubbornness and rage. But now, standing before them, they saw something different. The human warrior, covered in ash and scars, did not raise his voice in triumph or boast about his survival. Instead, he stood quietly, checking on the wounded, offering water, and lifting the weak onto makeshift stretchers. His strength was undeniable, but it was the calm dignity in his actions that pierced deeper than any weapon. One by one, alien soldiers who had once sneered at humans lowered their eyes in shame, realizing they had judged wrongly. It was not the image of a beast they saw, but the reflection of values they themselves often forgot: loyalty to comrades, sacrifice for the vulnerable, and honor even in the face of cruelty. A young alien officer, who had mocked humans only days before, now found himself whispering apologies under his breath. Others followed, bowing their heads slightly, a gesture that marked respect in their culture. The shift was not forced. It was born from witnessing something they could not deny. The same man they had chained, insulted, and feared had chosen to save them when he could have left them to die. Around the campfires that night, stories spread quickly. Some aliens admitted they had never seen such courage without selfishness attached to it. Others confessed they had believed humans were lesser beings, unworthy of standing as equals in the galaxy. But the memory of a man dragging broken beams aside, pulling both friend and foe from the fire, silenced their old prejudices. For the first time, they did not speak of humans as animals. They spoke of them as warriors of spirit. The human warrior never asked for their respect, but that only made it stronger. His silence, his humility, and his steady gaze reminded them that true power does not demand recognition. It earns it through action. The aliens, once proud and arrogant, now carried themselves differently when near him. Their voices softened, their eyes lowered, and even hardened commanders chose their words carefully, knowing they stood before someone who had redefined strength in their eyes. Back among the humans, news of the change reached the ears of soldiers and civilians alike. To hear that even enemies had bowed their heads to a single man's honor filled them with quiet pride. It was proof that humanity's greatest weapon was not its machines or tactics, but the spirit that refused to surrender its dignity. That day, respect was not taken by force. It was freely given, and it marked the beginning of a new chapter in how the galaxy saw humankind. Years passed after the war, but the memory of the human warrior never faded. Across colonies, stations, and distant worlds, the story of the one they called the Crocodile in human form was told and retold. At first, it was whispered as rumor by those who had seen him in battle, describing how he waited with patience, then struck with sudden force, never wasting a move. Later, it became a legend carried by travelers, merchants, and even alien voices who had once mocked humanity. What made the tale endure was not only the victories he achieved, but the way he carried himself, with restraint, with purpose, and with an unshakable belief in dignity. He was not remembered for seeking glory, but for defending life, even when no one expected him to. For the young of humankind, his story was more than entertainment. It was a lesson. Teachers used it to explain that strength was not measured by size or technology, but by the heart that refused to give up. Children would act out his battles in games, not to glorify violence, but to capture the courage that lay in standing firm against overwhelming odds. Soldiers, too, carried his example in their training, reminded that discipline and patience often win battles where sheer power cannot. His name became less about one man and more about an idea. The idea that humanity, though fragile in body, was unbreakable in spirit. Among aliens, the legacy carried a different weight. Once they had spoken of humans as rash and untamed, but after the story of the crocodile spread, they spoke with caution, sometimes even respect. Commanders warned new recruits not to underestimate human endurance. Elders in alien councils used his example as a reminder that arrogance blinds, while humility teaches. In some places, statues were even raised, not to celebrate conquest, but to honor a warrior who proved that being human meant carrying a sense of responsibility larger than oneself. The man himself, long gone, never knew the full reach of his reputation. Yet the image of him standing with calm eyes on the battlefield, refusing to bow, lived on. For many, it was not his victories but his choices that defined him, saving even enemies, answering questions of hatred with words of purpose, and never forgetting that his fight was for family, freedom, and the right to live with dignity. Thus, the legacy of the crocodile in human form became part of humanity's story in the stars. It was not written in monuments of steel or records of conquest, but in the way hearts were moved and perspectives changed. He became a symbol that humanity was not to be measured only by its weapons or armies, but by its will to stand, its resilience to endure, and its courage to protect. In the end, his life proved that true strength lies not in power alone, but in purpose, and that was a lesson no world could forget.